Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, March 1st, 2017. Happy March, first day of the new month. There was a big speech last night. Remember, it wasn't the State of the Union address. I saw a lot of people tweeting about how nobody was tweeting about how it was a State of the Union address this time around. So good job picking up on the themes, everybody. We're all on the same page. Not all on the same page about what happened yesterday, but hey, it's our chance to review it. It's Wednesday. We should have Greg Dworkin waiting in the wings, and later on, Joan McCarter joining us for her regular Wednesday visit, if all is going well. And we'll review what happened last night. Huge pivot last night. It finally got the pivot we've been waiting for. The media have pivoted, and Trump is presidential. Some mixed reviews yesterday. Those looking, of course, at style over substance were pleased somehow that I guess he didn't fall off the podium or anything like that, or try to bang the gavel or hit anybody or pass out. Nothing like that. None of the bad things that could have happened fall down the steps on his way up and down from the podium. That's always a possibility. He read the words so beautifully written on this transparent plasticky screen thing that they have here for me. So wonderful, really. And he did it successfully. I don't know how often he went off script. I think there were a couple of moments where he seemed to be kind of sort of ad-libbing it, but he mostly stuck to the script. That had to make his staff happy. And I don't know, somehow he managed to get everybody to declare him punditry, a lot of punditry, not everybody, but declare him presidential for... And I think the moment that they all pointed to was he had, interestingly, it was the guests in the audience game, which I guess means this will continue forever. It's not something he invented, clearly. It's just something, he plays and I don't know. It's not even at a higher level than anybody else. Okay, well, at any rate, included among the people in the audience, the one that had the big impact was the widow of the SEAL commando who was killed in the Yemen raid, which he had just earlier in the day in his interview that we were all dissecting. I guess it was the day before, but we were all dissecting earlier in the day his interview with Fox and Friends, in which he essentially said, the SEAL was killed in the raid, but that's really everybody else's fault. And then he had his widow in, and, he's not going to say in the speech it's everybody else's fault. So instead he says, all the right things for a president to say. And this is the only part I will say in a roundabout way was normal. Yes, it was definitely abnormal that he says, well, I bungled this whole thing and I killed your husband, but isn't this fantastic? But to be perfectly honest, lying about the circumstances in which members of the armed forces, and particularly special forces, are killed, and saying that it was a great strategic victory and it yielded all sorts of important results in the ongoing fight against terrorism, and that the person who was killed had sacrificed their life in this great cause. That's the most normal thing presidents do. I guess I should say, no, I'm sorry. That's the most normal thing he's done yet as president. That is to say, that is normally done by presidents, although it is absurdly abnormal for a human being to know what we know about how the raid went down, and we're all still learning and still trying to figure out exactly what it means. And it certainly could be that in the long run, there was nothing that much worse about this raid than any other. I mean, as it turns out, they didn't get one interpretation of what went on to be perfect, as fair as possible to everybody, is that it didn't net a whole lot of really good intelligence. It just didn't come up with anything. I don't know if that's something that's controllable by planning better or not. It may just be that, look, you conduct these raids when you get the chance, and sometimes you score and sometimes you don't, and people get killed in them, and we ought to be honest about that. But, and we also ought to be honest about the fact that whoever is the president eventually executes that raid. Yes, it's true that Obama had that raid on the table and did not execute it, but he probably would have done that at some point if he had continued in the presidency. And it might have gone well, it might have gone badly. It might have yielded intelligence, it might not have. I mean, that's sort of the risk you have to take. But I can pretty well promise you that had it gone poorly and intelligence not have been yielded, President Obama, had he been president at the time, would almost certainly have said that this SEAL had been killed in the service of his country in an ongoing war against terrorism and an ideology that wants to, destroy innocent life, and all the rhetoric would have been the same. And, of course, he would have been attacked from the right for it, and so it's not surprising necessarily to see an attack from the left on this stuff. But somewhere along the line we ought to acknowledge, without excusing what he did, without excusing anything he did, without trying to make him sound presidential even though he wasn't, I would say one of the things we see most frequently and with the greatest regularity from any presidents of every party and every stripe is when a member of the armed forces is killed in the line of duty. We don't spend a whole lot of time when we're talking directly to the family anyway, or even just speaking in general to America. We don't spend a lot of time questioning the role that person was playing at the time. We do sometimes question the wisdom of the operation, perhaps the wisdom of the war in which the operation was a part. But we can't act terribly surprised that a president has said some things that aren't exactly true in an effort to honor the sacrifice of a member of the armed forces. That being said, I don't know that anybody has ever tried to hold up the idea that the length of the applause was a world record, and so therefore everybody should be happy now. I'm sure you're very happy. I mean, she was on the verge of tears because her husband had just been killed. But I'm sure you're happy now because there was an awful lot of applause. I will say this, I have never actually literally seen the Just Clap Louder play executed before my very eyes and then see it work. So that was kind of unique and surprising. I've seen people try and do it a lot. It's a common play, especially at State of the Union and State of the Union-like addresses. The team on which the president plays is often instructed. We want to make sure that the president gets a good reception. I have no doubt whatsoever that they made that point repeatedly and extensively in advance to the Republican conference. This White House more concerned with public image and how things play on television than perhaps any other, given that he's a quote-unquote reality TV star. So I have no doubt that they prompted that, and I have no doubt that he prepared himself with those remarks, too, to let her know, it should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. It was so fantastic. It's the highest rated applause for a widow ever, period. Let me just tell you, believe me, no war widow has ever been applauded for longer. I checked it. It's the highest rated ever. The New York Times is failing, and you are succeeding. So obviously that part of it was a little bit sick. But, yeah, that's kind of the State of the Union / non-State of the Union play to make when you get a war widow up there. I have no doubt that any president of any party would have said largely the same thing, minus the, you broke the record, congratulations. That surprised me a little bit. Greg, good morning. How you doing? Did you see the speech?
I heard the speech.
Okay.
And looked in on parts of it. But
yes.
The way the setup is that upstairs,
yeah. Oh, okay.
my apolitical wife was watching the speech.
Yes.
Downstairs, I was at the computer, but I was able to hear the sound from upstairs.
And the fury. Yes.
And I turned it on for the seal part because I wanted to see how that was playing. But other than that, it was more listening than anything else. And it was interesting in a number of different ways. Let me start out with some observations by some of the pundits. I also had the New York Times page up, which had video. So I was watching the video while hearing the speech from upstairs. So the video and speech were separated. That way I could look at how it looked with the sound off, but at the same time hear what he was saying.
Oh.
It was kind of interesting to do that. But then all of the New York Times correspondents, Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman, were making comments along the way.
Yes.
It was interesting to watch them. Glenn is by far the most cynical and therefore the most fun to follow. And he tweeted, for example, "The time for trivial fights is over," said a president who spent the first 48 hours of his presidency arguing about inauguration crowd size.
Yes, nothing more trivial in the arguments that ever seen anywhere in the world than the ones advanced by Donald Trump.
Right. I'm just going to read you a couple of comments from some of the Twitter feeds and then just talk about this a little bit. Jason Sparks noted something that Chris Cillizza said. Cillizza said this is the best speech he gave, and then he said again, I ask, why can't Trump be praised for delivering a good speech, full stop? And the answer is because your own paper listed all the untruths and actually had an article that was entitled Analysis Fact-Checking President Trump's Address. Most presidents try to be sure their speeches to Congress adhere closely to the facts, not Donald Trump. So there's nothing wrong with saying this was a workmanlike speech, a good speech. Somebody else wrote it, probably Kellyanne Conway, because her kind of speech appealed to the middle, filled with lies, but it sounds good. And why can't you just say it was a good speech delivered well, which nonetheless was full of inaccuracies? Because that's basically what we saw last night. Will it make a difference? Of course not. There's some CNN Snap polls up. Trump got a 57. W and Obama got in the 60s, so it wasn't the most well-received speech ever. So you can't quote it on that regard.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
But also it was.
And so, there's a number of different things here. There's nothing wrong with saying that, fine, he gave a what you would expect from a president. And, Tom Bonnier, for example, said the media response to the speech is reminiscent of a parent praising a child for defecating in the toilet for the first time. And I added, and not on the floor. I mean, the low expectations are so phenomenal that Trump benefits from them because he didn't trip and therefore it was presidential. It's just astounding. This
was the longest lowering of expectations game I've ever seen played. It was a full 39 days in the making, right. And including the transition since November. Actually, really since probably July.
So Jason Sparks says, well, in response to Cillizza, so what made the speech good? Capitalizing on a widow's grief hours after shifting blame, lying about the ACA, demonizing immigrants, all of which are in there.
Yeah, those are all good.
Yeah, those are all good.
I thought so.
Was it false claims? I mean, it was just an awful speech in a lot of ways in regard to factual information in it. And demonizing immigrants was just horrible. I mean, that's monstrous.
Yes.
And to step back and look and say, okay, this was great because I liked the visual of the widow crying.
Yes, wonderful.
Longest cry ever. It's like this is, my response to all of it was, if you have any doubts about whether the White House Correspondents Association dinner should be canceled, just look and read the White House Correspondence.
I guess so. And that's not that they should cancel it because he considers them an enemy of the people. It's that the people don't want to hear those guys talk about themselves.
And maybe what they should do is stop worrying so much about access and just do your job.
Yes.
And do your job includes fact-checking, which happy the Washington Post did.
Yeah.
And looking at this other stuff in context. Somebody pointed out that one of the problems with the media is they have the attention span of a toddler. That if you play peekaboo with them,
that's a problem. Yeah.
That they forget that, hey, who's behind those hands? Oh, I'm surprised again. Oh, I'm surprised again. Oh, I'm surprised again. They don't put anything in context in terms of what happened yesterday, last week, last month, even the morning of, as you pointed out with the SEAL story. Because that SEAL story includes the father saying this is a disaster and I will not lend myself to being exploited. And it is part of the fact-finding that was published in the papers also yesterday morning that there was no good intelligence gotten from it. So somebody sent this guy to his staff, and who was it and why? And that's all part of the picture. And you can't ignore that because there was a good visual for 2 minutes of the widow. I mean, it's incredibly stupid, shallow, inappropriate, and unprofessional of the media to do this, and that's why we get mad at them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's an amazing thing, and why can't he be praised? And it's the reason is there's this thing called context.
Leave out the context. That's why he can't be praised.
Yeah. I mean,
George W. Bush, mission accomplished.
It is really rather remarkable, and I know that there's psychology involved in it, but I mean, I can't even recall ever going back to, like, say, to a math teacher in school and saying, I got the answers wrong, but the penmanship is impeccable. I have shown my work. It's all here. It's all incorrect, but it's in order. It's neatly written. I don't understand. Why can't I be praised for that?
It's the first time I did it, so I should get an A.
Yes, right. And consider how terrible I am at math.
I did it in crayon. Look at me. I did it in pencil.
It's all on the paper.
Yeah. Within the lines.
Yeah. I finished at the time I said I was going to. I don't know.
What can you possibly find wrong with this?
Very little.
And that's the media approach to this, and that's why it is so horribly annoying, because you'd think after what happened with the election itself and what happened between then and now, and them being called enemy of the people, they'd get their act together.
You would think so. Well, they'll have a chance.
If you thought so, you'd be wrong.
They're all going to Mar-a-Lago this weekend.
Now, to be fair, that was last night's mostly cable reaction. And mostly cable is useless. And what actually happens, the 57%, and whether people even remember the speech in 2 days, Armando pointed out, not likely, he's right. Whether or not it has any difference. What he didn't do in this speech, in addition to tell the truth, is set up anything that would help his congressional liaison folks work with something. Did he talk about the Affordable Care Act? Did he give anything to Congress that helps his party know where the heck he stands on any stuff?
Well,
no.
He did say he was going to do something, so it's going to be beautiful.
Hey,
and
he's going to raise.
Great.
He's going to give you more services, and he's going to lower taxes. Did he tell you how? No, he never does. So in a lot of ways, this was a vague Trump speech that makes vague promises, and you can read into it anything you want and hear what you want to hear. And remember this whole nonsense about there was going to be a pivot and he was going to offer a compromise on immigration, which never happened, which is a bunch of BS.
Oh, well, yeah, and he didn't do it in the speech. Well,
it was all about how we might do it in the speech.
Yeah, but there was all kinds of weird hints.
The press was totally manipulated yesterday, and they fell for it hook, line, and sinker. That doesn't mean that 2 days from now they won't be back to where they belong. But the first 24 to 48-hour reaction is pretty darn bad.
Yes. Well, today is Wednesday. 2 days from now is Friday. He'll be going to Mar-a-Lago, and I think they said today they were going to be delaying their latest go at the immigration or the Muslim ban immigration executive order this week. So I imagine that'll be a Friday afternoon signature out the door off to Mar-a-Lago thing. But they were delaying it. One thing I heard was they're delaying it because they wanted everybody to bask in the moment of yesterday's speech and not steal any thunder from the speech, which contradicts the whole.
I love that strategy.
We got to do it.
Change a thing.
Yeah.
And the way it completely undercuts his, you have to do this urgently because every day we wait is a day that more terrorists are coming into the country.
But apparently that's
But it's okay to wait because
I'm great. It was very, we broke a record, so we ought to wait. I don't know. The whole thing was very weird. And I will say that the afternoon cycle pre-speech was all about Trump signaling that he's going to do the exact opposite to everything he said about immigration and offer amnesty to everybody. Isn't that amazing?
Right. And of course, I pointed out at the time I was writing this, why are you getting all excited about this non-concession concession that isn't going to happen? He is playing you. And guess what? You were played.
Oh, well. At least he met expectations in that we thought he was going to play people, and he did. So there you go. Once again, clearing the bar. Right.
Here's one from Thomas Lepson before we move on to other topics.
All right.
Just had to get that off my chest because it's phenomenally annoying and in the end won't make any difference.
It's the longest phenomenally annoying thing ever.
Speech And it's not going to change a darn thing about who he is.
No.
And the fact that he's totally unqualified and he's doing stuff that shouldn't be done. And that's the resistance. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, well, he gave a good speech. Now let's all go home. It doesn't work that way. So Thomas Levinson on Twitter. Anyone who asked, is our media learning over the last few weeks has an answer. U.S. punditry remains utterly unable to parse Trump. There are many failure modes for pundits, starting from partisan hackers, ignorance, and bluntly, not that smartitude. But the biggest structural flaw lies with what can be seen as a willed failure of memory, like famed neuropatient HM. Our elite and feckless political journalists class reacts only to the latest stimulus without integrating what they've experienced. Here's the peekaboo line. With all that they've learned leading up to that moment, their babies constantly entranced by peekaboo. If you want to know how the least fit candidate in decades, perhaps ever, became president, this is a big part of how.
Yes. And now Oprah says, maybe I could be president.
Maybe she can.
Right.
Because, if that's the standard, why not?
No, there's no reason whatsoever. Literally anybody at this point could do it. Certainly somebody popular, I imagine, would be able to do it. She's popular. She's been on television. Yeah. I don't know why she would ever give up that possibility. But okay, yeah. We learned an awful lot about that, and I imagine she had that thought even before the speech, and certainly by now, if she's not convinced, she never will be.
Right. Robert Costa writes this morning, some sources in the White House are frankly surprised at how pundits are warming to the speech, say Trump has not changed, no big shift in policy coming.
Yes.
Matthew Iglesias says, yes, the White House is literally laughing at you all.
Yeah, pretty much. They really, even they had low expectations for the speech, I guess, or at least low expectations of the media. They just thought, oh, well, those guys are so committed to bashing us, they're just going to bash us no matter what we do. And then they didn't. So I don't know why. Now, I hope that there's three-dimensional chess going on here, and the press is just setting them up for...
well, no, there's none of that. It's just that, it gives you an idea of the limitations of the press and the fact that they can't deal with the fact that he's a non-conventional president in that sense. Basically, that you have a white nationalist in the White House with Bannon, with Trump supporting that, and Sessions, of course, ready to enforce. And you have a situation where Bannon is a Leninist, and he would love to burn the whole thing down. And the press keeps saying, no, it's a pivot. It's going to pivot. There's going to be a pivot. We're waiting for the pivot. Here's the pivot. Is this the pivot? Maybe next week will be the pivot. Forget about that 5 a.m. tweet that's coming tomorrow. There must be a pivot. And they are so fixated on normalizing him that they will do anything that they are given in order to try and do that. So they set the bar so low that he has to succeed. And it's just you scratch your head and say, this is ridiculous. Is everybody being held to the same standard here? I don't think so.
No, but I'm amazed. I imagine that there are journalists who think, yes, of course, the standard is, do they put on president clothes and come when they're supposed to? And it started at 9, and, all the people who were supposed to attended. They said words, mouth noises were made, hand noises responded. There was standing, there was sitting. What's not normal about that?
Right. Here, let me give you another one. This is Katie Torr, who was following it live at the time. And this is actually rather extraordinary.
The full
one. Yeah, I'm going to read you the full one here. You know what I'm talking about already. That's what I like about David. So,
I don't know. Yeah, I already don't know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, you do. Listen, this is Katie Torr.
Yes.
What the president did with Owen's widow was capital P presidential. It was the single most extraordinary moment I've seen from Trump by far.
Mm-hmm. Capital P, and he loves P in any capital.
550 retweets, 1,600 likes.
Okay.
And then she adds, but remember, the moment came after Trump seemed to blame his generals Obama for Owen's death this morning.
Yeah.
And then she adds, an NBC News exclusive reporting. Senior intelligence sources dispute White House characterization of raid as success. No significant intel yet. And then she adds, which would mean that Trump isn't being honest with a grieving wife, and that is anything but presidential.
So, how long between... I think she...
Moments.
Yeah, I
now,
think she heard from people.
There's one here, okay? But that last one, which would mean that Trump isn't being honest with a grieving wife, and that is anything but presidential. There's a little lag there. Imagine that the first tweet is the one that gets sent around the most, which it is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And people were furious about it. But yes, I'm glad you had the whole collection.
If she had said, let me read it to you a different way. What if she had just done this? Remember that moment came after Trump seemed to blame his generals for Owen's death, and NBC News exclusive reporting senior intelligence sources dispute White House characterization of rate of success, no significant intel yet, which would mean that Trump isn't being honest with a grieving wife, and that is anything presidential. What if she just did that? Or what if she just did that and then added, but what the president did with Owen's widow was capital P presidential, single most extraordinary moment by far.
Huh.
By highlighting the first shallow style over substance thing first.
Yes, that was a mistake.
Then adding all the other stuff, completely cheapens everything that she said, frankly. And it would have been much more powerful and accurate if she had done it the other way. Or left that thing off altogether. I don't really care. If you think it was extraordinary and you want to say something about it, that doesn't make him presidential, because all the stuff that you just listed is anything but presidential.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm glad that certainly glad that she cleared things up.
Too. I mean, she's good. I'm glad that she added that other stuff. But this right there is the problem.
The first one. But I mean, I don't know. To me,
the first impression is, let me just tell you how wonderful it was. But no, tell me about what's going on, and then you can give me your summary at the end.
Well, that would be what I'd hope for. I think what we saw there was actual human got manipulated, because that was the point of the whole thing.
And
it was
smart enough to
crafted
realize
that way,
it,
and then
think,
she went.
She caught herself and she fixed it. I'm
Yeah.
not taking her to task. I'm just saying this is media writ large. A lot of them just did the first tweet and didn't even add the other stuff.
That's true. They went home. I've just encapsulated everything. Why, he's presidential. This is it. The pivot we've been waiting for.
Exactly. So I give her credit there. I love her. I think she's great. I think she's a really sharp and smart reporter who had to deal with a lot of abuse during the campaign itself. But what I'm saying is the way media is structured is they focus on that first part. That's the first thing they notice. It's the first thing they talk about. It's the first thing they think they need to bring up. Somebody like Chris Eliza is only going to bring that up. Somebody like Chris Matthews is only going to bring that up. And then the rest of it is, okay, there's also this other stuff. Well, why are you talking about that? You guys don't have any ability to give them any credit for anything.
Yes, well, there'll always be
why
some of
didn't you
that.
do the other stuff first, and then we could have talked about it in a reasonable context?
That's
you guys are
very
supposed to
largely
provide
television
context.
driven.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
No, they screwed it up.
Well,
so
yeah,
I'm
they're
very
television
annoyed.
oriented.
That's why I'm annoyed at them.
And I guess
And
it
I
shouldn't.
think with grounds, I'm not just annoyed because partisan.
Yes. Well, I agree, and I think the reason they're so visually driven or so stylistically driven is because everything is geared towards the television medium, and you just saw this thing. Well, we have to talk about what you saw. Forget what you heard. And we've been told a number of times, and that's why your experiment was so interesting, that the visuals are everything in terms of making an impression on the audience.
Yeah, and frankly, it was a very unimpressive speech without the sound until that the seal moment.
Yeah, I have a difficult time watching him with or without sound. I mean, it's tough to watch Trump. I think it's harder without the sound. The sound is like a relief to me because I can laugh at the content. But watching the way he purses his lips in every
everybody has the threshold where they have to turn it off. So I'll stop there with that speech. That's as much as I'm going to say about it.
All right,
and I'll move on to some of the other topics we have there, and I think that there's some fascinating ones. First of all, I just thought you would really thoroughly enjoy this one.
Mm-hmm.
It's from Charles P. Pierce.
Okay.
And it's called Why I'll Never Sympathize with Regretful Trump Voters.
Okay.
And he makes a counter-argument to the one that I've been making. And I told him I thought it was a fantastic piece. I think he's wrong, but it was a fantastic piece.
Oh, okay.
And Michael Cohen in the Boston Globe writes one similarly. Both of them are up at the Pundit Roundup this morning.
Okay.
And his other one is Don't Give Trump Voters a Pass. Michael Cohen is a little bit more subtle. Gets the idea that there's a difference between different kinds of Trump voters. He says many people Michael Cohen does, voted for Trump, Nick Kristof says, not because they are bigoted, unthinking lizard brains, but because they didn't know where to turn and Trump spoke to their fears. And that's not an unreasonable argument. It's true, he says, that not every Trump supporter is outwardly racist or misogynist. I've spoken to many of them. Few said awful things to me, but most don't fall easily into the caricature that is developed around them. That's what I like about what he's saying. Mm-hmm. Most didn't support all of Trump's policies. Many were partisan Republicans who couldn't imagine not voting for a Republican. But one thing they all had in common was an extraordinary ability to compartmentalize Trump's worst excesses. I think he brings up a good point here. Whatever the reason Americans voted for Trump, we know that every one of them chose to support a candidate who made repeated bigoted, xenophobic, and misogynistic statements. They supported a candidate who mocked a disabled reporter, demonized an entire religion, made veiled anti-Semitic comments, including some ridiculous ones yesterday, in which he seemed to indicate that maybe the problem with the call-in bomb threats to all those Jewish centers were the Jews.
I almost forgot that he...
That was just yesterday, media talking about how Trump pivoted last night.
That was very presidential, too, if you think about it and don't care what the meaning of any of those words is.
Right. Even if one puts all that aside, Michael Cohen says, though I'm not sure how, they voted for a candidate who lied on a daily basis, including last night, I would add, and who regularly showed he was demonstrably unqualified to be president, which I would also argue last night. Many continue to support him, even though Trump's presidency so far has been defined by more lies, incompetence, nasty policies that target the most vulnerable people in our society. From the perspective of national Democrats, one can certainly understand why demonizing Trump's voters could be counterproductive. And in general, and this is the part where I bolded, so I'm bolding it.
Okay.
And in general, they shouldn't be caricatured. But we should be honest about what they've done, says Susanna Armando. They can and should be held to account for not being bothered enough by Trump's intolerance and cruelty. Nick Kristof is absolutely right that we're all complicated. Stereotypes are not helpful. But what's even less helpful is failing to be fully honest about what Trump's election tells us about the 62 million people who voted for him.
All right. That seems fair enough to me.
Now, if they were going to go back and vote for him again, I wouldn't have anything good to say about him. My contention is that some of them wouldn't vote for him again given a second chance. How many? I don't know. But I don't think there's 62 million that would.
Well, I hope not.
And for every one of them that wouldn't, I'm willing to be empathetic, meaning I'm trying to understand what you're like in your shoes, without being sympathetic, meaning I sort of agree with you, which I don't. So my point is, it's a reminder that many do not like that they voted for him, felt they made a mistake. They do have regrets. They're our targets. I don't think shaming them wins you more votes. Try and understand. Don't sympathize because they did screw us. But it's not incompatible to think that what Cohen said is good and that shaming non-deplorable Trump voters is bad. The deplorables you can do whatever you want with. Of course, Charles Peace said, no, none of that. I'm not having any of it.
Okay.
He says they brought the disaster on themselves. They must own it. And basically he's talking about the fact that they're going to screw themselves in terms of health care and everything else. And he says, Holy Mother of God, I'm tired of reading quotes from people who live in places where the local economy went to hell, or Mexico in 79, and who have spent the intervening years swallowing whatever Jesus juice was offered up by theocratic bunco artists of the Christocentric right, and gulping down great flagons of barely disguised hate-mongering against the targets of the day, all the while voting against their own best interests, now claiming that empowering Trump as the man who will shake things up was the only choice they had left. Had plenty of choices left, and of course he invokes Kansas.
Okay.
I mean, look, they reelected Sam Brown back, who's completely destroying their economy.
Right.
They voted for him. So he doesn't have too much. But he does say this. Even Charles P. Pierce says this, and I quote, "You all had the same choices we all had. You saddled the rest of us with misrule and disaster. Own it." And then here's the bolded quote for you. "I empathize, but I will not sympathize."
Uh-huh.
I talked him into it.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
we argue all the time on I'm not saying me personally, but he's aware there's a difference between the two things. And what I find difficult when you actually try to have a reasoned argument with our side about it is somebody will say, many of these people are deplorable, therefore they all suck. And I will say, you started out with many, that implies it's not all, And so how do you get to all in the second part of it? That's where I part ways.
I see. Well, we can say many of them are deplorable, therefore we may need to trounce them all.
Vote them.
Yes.
Destroy them at the ballot box. I think it's a fantastic idea, all for it. How do you do that? You recruit some of the others. Or at least, if you can't do that, make them sit on the sideline.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the ultimate calculation here is if somebody told people, even if you say, I'm not having any of it, and say Pierce never pivots at the end, if you put the question to them, if I told you that by keeping your mouth shut for a week, we would flip 1 million votes, would you do it?
Yeah, and then somebody says to you, I'm not doing that because it's not right, and I was right, and right counts. And I would say, that's fine, but do you want to win?
Yeah, in most cases, I guess. I mean, if people would ask you, what can you guarantee me? And you can't.
Yeah, that's what it usually comes down to. No.
Right.
But if you want to increase your odds, enhance your chances, do it my way.
Well, that's one thought. And then, of course, it's to be understood, I think. We have to empathize, whether you sympathize or not, with the people who say, no, I think that there's another way to do this, and it's beat the living crap out of them day in, day out in public.
Okay,
well, I have not seen that. Argument. Yeah, I've not really seen that one work yet. But
it never works.
If it never works, though they would then point to Trump's victory and say he did it.
The same thing as winning.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, yeah, I would expect that they would say, I just watched Trump forces do exactly that, and they were just awarded the White House. But, on the other hand, you did just tell me last week they didn't really win. They lost by 3 million votes. They just were dispersed differently. Okay. Well.
Kagro and Dworkin, political consultants, okay? And we're going to go out and say, I got a great strategy for you. I want you to go out and tell the voters they're all stupid. Guaranteed winner. Always wins.
I can do it. I can make it work.
Proof that it's ever won before? No, but I don't have to because we're new consultants.
Trump.
We've never done this before. We've never lost a race by doing it this way.
That's true too. Yes, I suppose that's possible.
Now that you mention it, Kagro and Dworkin are undefeated. We're jacking up our fees.
Yeah, doubling it, $200,000 just to have dinner with us once in a while.
Because what could go wrong with telling the audience that they're all stupid?
I suppose that is true. There is something to it. Well. What do you know if a middle ground doesn't appeal at the end of this?
Charles B. Pierce is a great writer, and it's a fun piece, and I just thought you might enjoy it.
Well, you have to build a coalition with him if he's that good.
Yeah. Here's one from the Washington Post by Mike Gerson, which I also thought was fantastic. Bannon's reckless pursuit of ethno-nationalist greatness. Mike Gerson is the last of the actual compassionate conservatives.
Really?
2 sets of remarks, a day apart, by 2 men more accustomed to being behind the scenes. By the way, I say that about Gerson because he is a committed, do what's best for those that are less fortunate than yourselves. Just do it the conservative way. I could live with that. It showed because he was the champion in the Bush administration, the W administration, on PEPFAR, the AIDS relief overseas. He was one of the only people who was actually pushing it. He meant it. He got it done.
He thought all lives mattered.
He did.
Okay.
But acted on it.
Yeah.
So, I'll give him that. A good friend of E.J. Dionne, who vouches for him. And so what he writes is 2 sets of remarks a day apart by 2 men more accustomed to being behind the scenes. Stephen K. Bannon at CPAC made the case for economic nationalism and called President Trump's withdrawal from TPP one of the most pivotal moments in modern American history. So the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the defeat of the Soviet Union finally have some company.
That's okay. We're out of that thing we're not in.
Right.
Pivotal.
Gerson's good. As the ideologist in Trump's inner circle, Bannon is a practitioner of Newt Gingrich's mystic arts. Takes some partially valid insight at the crossroads of pop economics, pop history, pop psychology, declare it an inexorable world historic force, and by implication take credit for being the only one who sees the inner workings of reality.
That's nicely done.
Yeah, it's a pretty good description of Gingrich, wouldn't you think?
Yes.
Right? I like reading.
That's
good.
Dead on.
Yep. For Bannon, it has something to do with the 4th turning, or maybe the 5th progression, or the 3rd cataclysm.
The 3rd wave was Gingrich's thing, by the way. Yeah. So this, of course, is obviously the 4th turning. And when this fails, 20 years hence, some other drunken idiot.
That's why Gerson is riffing on this. It's really funny, especially when you know the players here. At any rate, it apparently involves cycles of discontent and disruption, lots of disruption, Across the West, as he sees it, the victims of globalization, the victims of immigration, free trade, internationalism in general, are rising against their cosmopolitan oppressors. Institutions will crash and rise in new forms. Empires rise and fall, fortunes made and lost. And this restless world spirit takes human form in Nigel Farage and Donald Trump.
Okay.
And then he goes on to say, he's so good, like many philosophies that can be derived entirely from an airport bookstore.
Mm-hmm. I
love that line. This one has an element of truth. The beneficiaries of the liberal international order have not paid sufficient attention to the human cost of rapid economic change, which is true. But there's a problem with the response of economic nationalism and ethno-nationalism. It is morally degraded and dangerous to the country. So, he's got a point there.
Yes.
And somebody had remarked the problem with the Crystal Lizzos of the world is that they're totally fixated on admiring the problem rather than fixing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, Trump just lied in this speech, but he did it masterfully. Let's write about that for like 10 columns.
Oh, yes. Well, actually, I just now am reminded of Carly Fiorina. She was steely, right? She when everybody knew at the time in the debate, she just lied. But boy, did she do it in a steely way.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. And that's what got written.
That's admiring the problem rather than dealing with it.
Yeah.
So, which brings us to the second set of remarks at a State Department retirement party complete with cake. And by the way, is it okay if I go in a little longer today? I do have a little bit more time.
Oh, it's fine by me.
Just checking.
It's a record, everybody. You know it's good.
That's all applause.
Okay, that's all I got.
This speech was from one of the most distinguished diplomats our nation has recently produced, Ambassador Dan Fried. Fried was on his diplomatic duty for 40 years, focusing mainly on Europe. Ambassador to Poland, pulled into the White House as special advisor on Central and Eastern Europe to both Clinton and George W. Bush. Most populists would probably view Fried as the pinstriped enemy. I came to know him in the Bush administration as a freedom fighter deeply and personally offended by oppression. He had been an enemy, not an opponent, but an enemy of the Soviet Union, and remains a committed friend to 100 million liberated Europeans. Fried used his retirement remarks to describe America's grand strategy. For decades, the U.S. has stood for an open, rules-based world with the United West at its core. Despite occasional failures and blunders, the world America made after 1945 and 1989 has enjoyed the longest period of general peace in the West since Roman times. What would happen if the U.S. were to leave the global order and pursue its own ethno-national greatness? That's the proposal that the populists have placed on the table, in which blowing up TPP is a sign of things to come. By abandoning this American grand strategy, we would diminish to being another zero-sum great power, resulting in a system entirely based on spheres of influence admired by those who don't have to suffer the consequences. And accepting spheres of influence would mean our acquiescence when great powers, China and Russia, dominated their neighbors through force and fear. Some so-called realists might accept such a world as making the best of a harsh world, but rather the reverse, a sphere of influence system would lead to cycles of rebellion, repression, and if the past 1,000 years is any guide, lead to war between the great powers, because no power would be satisfied with its sphere. They never are. This is a foreign policy cycle more substantial than fourth turning. The disruptors of international order, the liberal democratic order built and defended by FDR, Truman, Kennedy, and Reagan, are thoughtless, careless, and reckless. And they must be resisted. The founding fathers of the ethno-state are also in violation of the country's defining values. You got that? Did you hear that one there? Defining values? I call them shared values.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there. I mean, we're saying the same thing here. The United States was summoned into existence by the clear bell of unifying aspirations, not the primal scream of blood and soil. And this great ideal of universal freedom and dignity is not disrupted. It disrupts. So he's basically saying we have these shared values. He, the conservative, we, the progressives, ought to be able to see this. The substantive discussion of Ambassador Fried compared to the shallow coverage of the presidential speech yesterday by the media, in stark contrast with each other, is really somewhat frightening.
Yes. Well, this was well put, certainly.
He's a great writer, Kirsten. Former speech writer. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to agree with his politics, but, he certainly has a turn of phrase there.
Yes.
And he nailed Gingrich, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was skewering.
That was worth the column alone, just reading that part.
I like the summation too, and I guess that's to be credited to Fried as opposed to Gerson himself. But to pick it up, credit where it's due. This is a very interesting summation and a good reminder. I guess in the end,
we do have shared values. I was right.
And that,
thank you for saying so.
That's really basically it, and a good reminder that what was it? The founding fathers, etc. That conservatives love to summon in these issues were the great liberals of their time, the greatest liberals of the era, and I mean by era here, I mean post-Enlightenment. And forward. That was a liberal vision that they're trying to conservatively preserve. I think that's what they think.
Yes.
And all
they may not have been the architects, but they are trying to preserve it and, support them when you can. And that's how you find common ground. Mm-hmm. And by the way, they're right.
Yeah. Okay.
Because look at the alternative. Chaos.
That's true. However, instead, we now have a chance to applaud, by the way. This is the longest period of sustained peace since the Romans. So it's a record, everybody.
Yay. Let's break the record. Let's break it. Let's destroy it. Let's, make it into rubble.
Well, I knew there was a problem with this.
Oh, when you said break record, I didn't know that's what you meant.
Yes. Break all the records. Smash them to bits.
Smash them to bits. I thought you... okay, I get it. I'm so sorry.
I am confused, but I'm still confused by Bannon's profession of Leninism. Is this? I assume, by the way, this is just in the sense that
he wants to disrupt the state. He wants to disrupt
entirely
what's going on here, and the only way to do that is to burn it down.
State. I know that, but I mean,
here's a good, clear, easy example.
Yeah.
Point somebody to EPA who hates EPA. Point somebody to education who can't stand education.
Every night, teachers in my children's school assign homework to children who hate homework.
Yeah,
so there you go.
So it's the right way to do it.
Yes, the obvious model. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm new to. I've never studied Leninism per se.
How could you not? You're a progressive.
I don't know.
That's like
it's underneath my.
Can you quote page 3, paragraph 2 of Saul Alinsky right now here on the
spot?
It's
on my reading list. I never get to it.
Progressive.
I've never read. I don't know anything about Saul Alinsky. That doesn't insult me.
So Lenin, Alinsky,
the Weatherman. I don't know anything about him. Yeah. So. I just never really learned about Leninism in the context of, not the whole communist thing, because that was a minor part of Leninism. He just wanted to smash the state, the non-communist state, and establish a new one.
Right.
But I don't understand. Okay, well, that's a part that's new to me.
And also, why should you allow people to criticize you?
Yeah. I suspect it's nonsense, just like most of the rest of the things he says, and that he says he's a Leninist mostly because people will be put off their footing by hearing somebody who's clearly conservative saying they're a Leninist, and then you say, well, wow, he must be really thinking beyond what I have envisioned, and I don't know anything. He must be smart. He's a Lenin. He says he's a Leninist. He must know that we all think that means communist, and it doesn't. And wow. So what's this about the fourth turning? Tell me more.
So there's an interesting piece here. Okay. Since you brought that up, I'm going to see if I can find this. I think I can. It was written maybe half a month ago. And it's really kind of interesting. And it's written from Lawfare blog, which, as you know, is conservative/libertarian, and sometimes we make fun of them. But lately it's been having a lot of good stuff there, including Benjamin Witte's and other critiques of what's going on. But this one was from mid-February, written by Quinta Jurisic. And it's entitled Bannon in Washington, a report on the incompetence of evil. I thought you might enjoy this one too, and I thought our listeners might enjoy it as well. And basically, the idea here is that you could worry about Bannon, but it turns out what you were just saying here. She says, "Thank you, Steve Bannon. I mean that sincerely. I'm sleeping better because of you.
Oh.
Over the first few weeks of the Trump administration, Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has worked hard to establish himself as the would-be Grand Vizier of the White House. Bannon, the former executive chair of the winkingly white nationalist website Breitbart, was the driving force behind the executive order banning entry into the U.S. of immigrants and refugees from 7 majority Muslim countries, and now sits on the Principals Committee of the National Security Council. And if he had his way, the rest of this piece would be about how frightening he is. Because being scary is Bannon's shtick.
Yes.
He publicly compares himself not only to Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's newly popular fixer, but also to Darth Vader and Satan, declaring, "Darkness is good, that's power." In 2013, he told a reporter that he identified himself as a Leninist. "I want to bring everything crashing down and destroy all of today's establishment. The press is eating this up." More press criticism, which I think today is deserved, so I thought it would be good, and it also brings in the Bannon thing. Recently, Time described him as the great manipulator, and a political profile on his reading habits emphasized his supposedly towering and arcane intellect.
Woo!
The New York Times describes Bannon's familiarity with the mid-century Italian philosopher Julius Evola, who was too far to the right even for the fascists, but his tastes are also distinctly modern. He's familiar with the work of programmer Curtis Yarvin, who produced a now shuttered but still influential cult blog on far-right anti-democratic theory under the name of Mencius Moldbug.
Oh. Yeah, okay.
Familiar?
Yes.
And of Michael Anton, whose anonymous essay, The Flight of 93 Election, marked one of the major and only attempts to provide an intellectual scaffolding for Trumpism. Anton now works as a staffer on the NSC. Politico writes that Yarvin is now indirectly in touch with Bannon, though Yarvin has denied this. I'm going to call nonsense on this whole meme. In fact, I'd like to take a moment to thank Bannon for tempering my libertarian panic about the fate of democracy in America. 3 weeks ago, my libertarian panic was full-throated. I speculated we had cause for concern that Trump might be our first president in the mold of the fascist thinker Carl Schmitt, who notoriously wrote that the sovereign is he who decides on the exception. In the worst-case scenario, I worried that he would see the executive branch directly rejecting the authority of the courts. To be sure, I'm still concerned, but Steve Bannon has proven himself to be so monumentally incompetent that I am fairly certain the Republic is safer than I could have believed 3 weeks ago, at least from Bannon's flailing efforts to maximize whatever supposed contradictions he believes he has identified. Bannon isn't an arch-villain, and he's not the guy who's going to destroy American democracy. He's an internet troll.
Okay.
Which is fascinating. Think of him as the personal embodification, as if you had a spell and you wanted to invoke somebody and their essence could be created in human form, and you invoked Fortran. Or 4chan, rather.
Oh, Fortran.
The language, 4chan,
wow.
the website.
Okay. Well, yes, that's, or worse, apparently, 8chan, which
Or
is
8chan,
twice as bad.
16chan, or 64chan,
Right.
whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Bannon's ineptitude has become clear in the context of his role at the center of the refugee order botched writing and rollout. The strange context, the same context, out of which emerged the portrait of him as a sinister, all-knowing eminence Greece. To paraphrase Benjamin Wittes, the executive order was both deeply malevolent and profoundly incompetent. The question is whether the chaos – ooh, I love that chaos. Sends chills up my spine. Chaos that attended the order's rollout, in which legal permanent residents in the United States were denied entry into the country, and travelers were stranded in airports as federal officials frantically tried to figure out the legal scope of the ban, should be understood as a component of the order's malevolence or of its incompetence. In other words, did chaos blow the plan, or was chaos part of the plan? Only a few months ago, the notion of an executive order intentionally botched in order to engineer chaos would have been difficult to propose with a straight face, but such are the times that people are doing that. She gives some examples.
Yes.
But intuitive or not, it's almost certainly wrong. If Bannon's ultimate goal in drafting the executive order were really to create a white ethno-state by limiting immigration, he would have been far more effective doing so if he had opened up the draft order to interagency review and evaluation by council. When Trump first proposed the Muslim ban, there was much debate over whether such a plan could be effected constitutionally. So basically, he did it so badly that if he really wanted to do it, he would have done it well, is what she's arguing.
Yes.
I want to suggest an alternative way of viewing Bannon's recent behavior. It's best understood given the symbiotic relationship between online culture and Bannon's and Breitbart's particular brand of reactionary politics as government by internet trolling. Because trolling, in its purest form, is the act of deliberately behaving in an upsetting or offensive way in order to provoke an angry response. It's a form of entertainment, but in recent years also politics. reactionary politics. In particular, a troll might say, post a racial slur, then mock anybody who responds for being oversensitive.
Yes.
Trolling's become a central component of many of the online communities that make up the far right's online culture, including the alt-right. So Breitbart, which Bannon refers to as a platform for the alt-right, may be the most well-known example of the coupling of trolling with reactionary politics. The website isn't just far right. It's loud, it's brash. Articles like Birth Control Makes Women Unattractive and Crazy or Bill Kristol, Republican Spoiler, Renegade Jew, are not just intended for Breitbart's core audience, they're also meant to outrage everybody who's not in Breitbart's audience.
Yes,
which is exactly
I
what
would
trolling
agree.
do, right? Trolling reflects a profound lack of sincerity, even a hostility of sincerity. It allows the speaker to make an offensive declaration and insist that his or her, usually his, statement was just intended to make you mad and you're the real fool for taking this seriously. You're the real racist.
Yes.
Speaker gets to say the thing, gets to deny responsibility for the thing. The troll believes that people who care about things are chumps, and the only wise way to go about it is with a level of ironic detachment that borders on nihilism. Trolling isn't about being offensive or just about being offensive. It's about being gleefully offensive. So you have this confluence where that's your attitude, and then you got politics. And you get the most extreme examples. For example, Trump supporters who associate themselves with neo-Nazis, but, like Richard Spencer, who led a Heil Trump salute and then say it was all ironic and you guys are overreacting.
Yes, you normies.
You normies, exactly. So it's all 4chan culture here. And, by the way, he isn't, Bannon, exactly the far right, and he isn't, in fact, some great intellectual. It's actually rather superficial. And, the point of all of this is that Bannon is not a political genius, and his supposed vast and arcane intellect is neither vast nor is it arcane. It's the regular stuff of the trolling culture, the modestly educated pseudo-intellectual hard right. So he's no Darth Vader. He's maybe the ideological father of the executive order, but that strikes me as an instance of an internet troll coming up against legal and bureaucratic structures of process and losing because they didn't understand the importance and power of the institutions in the first place.
That's recognizable.
Yeah, so here's
us.
a guy like Bannon, and you would know this. You're a process expert, so you get this guy who's sitting there on the sidelines. He's Vinny from the Bronx calling in, telling the manager how to manage the team.
Yes.
And they say, okay, fine, you're the manager.
Yeah.
Now he's got to figure out what to do.
Why don't you just?
Why don't you just?
Yeah, because there's this and this and this, and these things will get in the way. Yeah, but they shouldn't. Well, they do. Yeah, but okay, then I'm a Leninist and I want to smash it.
Right.
Fine.
Now, incompetence has its dangers, so, we're not out of the woods.
True.
But that being said, she says, and finishes, it's very hard to dismantle major democratic institutions without a certain degree of capability. The establishment of authoritarianism takes both effort and cunning, and I'm much less worried than I was that these folks have the kind of cunning and focus it would take to take down the American experiment. And for that, I thank Steve Bannon.
Okay.
Very interesting piece. What do you think?
I like it. There's some bits and pieces in there that, you should all read it. And you had to skip over it in order to get to the main themes here. But you should all read the rest of this.
But I thought it was great.
But yeah, this is really good. I think this is another important piece of what Steve Bannon is really all about. Essentially this idea, I don't know, I think he grafted this idea of I want to create chaos onto it. It's important to know about that and to understand what they think they're doing. But I think he's just basically saying, well, these are the things I want to do. And it to the extent that I screw it up and it comes crashing down, I'll just say, well, I meant that. I meant for there to be chaos. If I win, essentially it's win-win, right? If he gets what he wants done for real, he says, great, I've done it. And if he fails miserably at getting it done because he has no understanding of what he's doing and what levers to pull, he just says, well, I told you I love chaos, so therefore I win again.
Yes, I've disrupted things, and that itself is a win. So
right.
I can only win, and I cannot lose.
Right. Farted in the elevator. I meant that. That's disruption. I want to make you uncomfortable. Okay? That's good plan.
Yeah. Great.
Right.
For the rest of us.
And seriously, that brings me right back to it. I go, who's the, it's weird to point to a younger person as sort of a godfather of the alt-right, but I mean, I guess the first alt-right figure we ever saw, maybe Ann Coulter, predates him. But Chuck Johnson, and I mean the one dumb, crazy-ass stunt he's most famous for, even though he denies it, was stunt in college where he thought everyone will fear me if I crap on the floor. And everybody thinks you're disgusting and crazy. I know, but they're afraid of me because I'm psycho, man. No, you're disgusting. Oh. Well, but I meant that. I wanted to disrupt toilets, I guess. I don't know what I was meant to do. But
I was unfamiliar with that story.
Oh, you were?
And I
How could
you
not know
now enlightening me.
You missed this one? Everyone, this is
was
the
one I was
assumed
not
background. Yes. Well, how else can I
cannot
something else
unhear
to
what
tell
I
you?
just heard.
No, yeah, there's a thing that I guess you could look it up on the internet.
I didn't make it up, I'm just saying.
He'll say I did. He denies it, but everybody who knew him in college was like, yeah, I don't know, he got in some kind of crazy argument somewhere, and then he decided that the way to settle it was to do that. No.
Allow me to change the subject?
Yeah, okay. Record, though. It was a record.
It was. The last piece I had, which I didn't get to because these other ones jumped in and they were just so interesting. And I thought they were. I thought the Gerson piece was fascinating. I thought the piece from Lawfare was fascinating. And this one is too, in its own way.
Uh-oh.
It's from Brian Boyler from New Republic. Republicans' final heinous push for Obamacare repeal. They're hoping a morally obscene sales pitch and an aggressive squeeze play will doom the Affordable Care Act. And they're talking about the fact that the Republicans are just, as he puts it, mired in dysfunction. The main impediment to repealing Obamacare is a substantial block of GOP lawmakers who won't vote to repeal the law without a replacement, and the main impediment to replacing it is a lack of consensus among Republicans about what they should enact in its place. In other words, they've had 8 years and they still can't figure out, 6 years, and they still can't figure out what it is that they want. So because they have no consensus as to what to replace it with, they're really stuck in terms of what to do. President Donald Trump invited derision on Monday when he said nobody knew health care could be so complicated, yet he was merely revealing he had been taken in by the promises that basically the House GOP was making.
He too.
And then he went ahead and made the same promises last night.
Yeah.
Which is going to come back and bite him because you can't deliver those things. But he promised, but you can't deliver.
Or he can just say,
oh, well, let's blame Paul Ryan.
Right. Though there's that too. Or he can just say, we did it, everybody. World record.
So, as Boyler points out, the drive to repeal Obamacare has its own momentum. Republicans have staked so much of their credibility on the repeal pledge that they can't easily walk away from it. Even if President Donald Trump and GOP leaders recognize that they were marching their party into a trap, they're gripped by a collective action problem wherein nobody wants to be held accountable for failure or surrender. This has left repeal supporters grasping for tactical maneuvers that might salvage the repeal-replace. They're coalescing around a carrot-stick approach, which I think has already collapsed, that combines a morally obscene sales pitch and an aggressive squeeze play meant to cow squeamish Republicans and far-right hardliners into submission before the window closes.
Yes.
So basically what they're trying to do, the Republican health policy divide falls along the same line of ideologic stridency that made the party ungovernable during the Obama years. They don't really care about health policy, but there's some that don't want to upend the Affordable Care Act because millions of people might be worse off. They don't care about that, but they do vote and they do care about that. And then others who believe the federal government's role in financing and regulating health insurance needs to be scaled back, period. So moderates, the vulnerable, and those whose constituents have taken disproportionate advantage, like people in Kentucky, are reluctant to overhaul the law, and members of the House Freedom Caucus and other radicals won't support it because it's like a welfare program.
Yeah.
So the views of those two camps are irreconcilable unless the moderates become convinced Paul Ryan-approved ACA alternative isn't as draconian as it almost certainly will be, or unless the radicals can be convinced the same plan is a take-it-or-leave-it opportunity to get the revenge they've been seeking for the partisan passage of Obamacare all along. So to do the first part, the Affordable Care Act opponents are reviving the bottom-feeding argument that throwing millions of people off their insurance won't be a humanitarian disaster because insurance is worthless.
Okay.
It's not going to work, but that's what they're trying. And they were just ridiculous arguments. The allies in the think tank world will go into elaborate lengths to convince Republicans the Affordable Care Act's coverage turns out to be ineffective. Now, That's somewhat less reckless and less offensive than intermittent conservative efforts to discourage potential beneficiaries from signing up, but only because it works indirectly toward the same end of making more people vulnerable to the risk of being uninsured. So people themselves know better. And that's just not really going to work. So Republicans tended toward disarray when the stakes were low. The worry for Obamacare supporters is that this tendency will disappear rather than worsen now that the stakes couldn't be higher. And I'm not sure which way it's going to go in that regard, but I think that they're kind of falling apart. You already have senators who are saying this isn't going to get past the Senate because it's irreconcilable to have the Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul people say, we will not accept this unless it's radically terrible. And you have Susan Collins and the moderates saying, we won't accept it if Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul get their vision. And it doesn't take a lot of losing Republican senators in order to make it a no-go in the Senate. And they're already talking about like 6 to 8 people who just hate it, what the Republicans are doing in the House. So, it's hard to see how Obamacare is actually going to go away.
Also interesting his outline of, I guess not that the speech is worth anything in particular, but the first minute or so of his description of what he meant to replace Obamacare with was, good news, everybody, we're getting Obamacare back.
Yeah, only better, cheaper.
Right. Then, of course, it just dove into fantasy from there. The way to bring down the price of insurance or the way to get more people insurance is to bring down the price. So we're just going to do it. Why don't you just?
Yeah, why don't you just make it better? What we really need is cheaper Obamacare that covers more people and gives better care. And I don't understand why people are standing in my way.
I want you to write that down so I can sign it before I go to Mar-a-Lago Friday.
Yeah,
I'm going to show it to everybody. Just put a picture of lower prices in there, like maybe the Walmart smiley thing, and we're done.
But he said that in the speech, and the speech was so great. I know that because, that's what all the pundits say.
Right, presidential.
Presidential. It was so presidential to completely screw up any further chance. You not only didn't help Obamacare get through the House and Senate, you actually made it harder. That's pretty presidential, don't you think?
Sure. I don't know. He was being a check and balance.
So there you have it at the beginning and the end of my segment. I'm not so happy with the media this morning. I think they pretty much screwed up.
Yeah, well, that was too bad.
It wasn't too hard. But it was too bad. Anyway, with that, thanks so much for allowing me on as long as I did. We're actually into your second hour now.
True.
And there is another hour of Kagro in the Morning coming, and what Dave's going to talk about and what strikes his fancy. None of us ever know.
Right, but I'm going to allow myself to be guided by John.
I'm fairly confident after I listen to the show later. I have a pretty good idea what you're going to talk about. But thanks so much. My good friend David Wallman and I are sharing some thoughts about the presidential joint address from yesterday and where we go from here. And is John going to be on the show later?
I hope so.
Tell her I said hi.
Let me go look, and I better check my email and make sure that there's nothing that says no. Usually, just very often, well, of course, busy with reaction to yesterday's speech, etc., and also listening to you. Very likely.
Well, if she can't come and I help to amuse and entertain you for a little bit longer than normal, I'm more than happy to do that. So I will be back on tomorrow.
Okay.
No pundit roundup for tomorrow, but I will be back on the show tomorrow, and we'll do it again.
All right.
Maybe not as long.
I'll give another speech. It'll be great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. You do the same, and we'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, all right. Doors open, so this is about the time that we usually get a quick note of I'm on my way from Joan, so don't worry, no reason to panic. I think we're all going to be okay. Also gives me a chance to open up a couple of other subjects here. I meant to say, well, one of the things that I guess got squeezed out yesterday was I did have this piece that Greg mentioned. He had sent it to me in the background. The Lawfare blog thing sounded fascinating yesterday, but I couldn't manage to squeeze it in. But right around the same time, it seems like there was a theme going on in the media. There was a piece in the New York Times, likewise touching on the trolling aspect of things. I don't think anything terrific was revealed in that one, but it was a good reminder and a good companion piece to the one in the Lawfare blog, the New York Times piece, How the Trolls Stole Washington. Might be worthwhile to skim through and take a look at and pull out a few points that we can match up with the, I thought, rather excellent ones pointed out by the Lawfare blog. Amanda Hess is the writer on this one. But yeah, I do think it's interesting and explanatory in a strange sort of way, and I guess married to the theme of Bannon's, I don't know whether it's faux Leninism or not, because I don't think I understand Leninism as he seems to define it. So I guess I can't speak as an expert to that, whether or not he's just kidding, but it certainly reads to a non-expert. And after all, don't we have to give credit to all the non-experts who are just viewing this stuff and taking away visuals from it without analyzing it or giving it any context? I don't understand why everybody else gets to do this as a simpleton and I don't. But the main takeaway for me from Bannon's brand of Leninism is it's an excuse for screwing things up. If I can't get the job done because I don't understand what's happening, and I don't understand the levers of power, then it's because the levers of power are stupid and I want to smash them. The end. And that seems like less than an ideology to me. Anyway, I just wanted to take a quick look at Amanda Hess's writing here on how the trolls stole Washington, see if it matches up with what we just heard. Over the course of Donald Trump's staggering political rise, observers tried to make sense of him by borrowing a metaphor from the internet. Trump, they said, was a troll. He was described as turning presidential aspirants into Twitter trolls by a primary challenger, Marco Rubio, and as the world's greatest troll by the data whiz Nate Silver, and after his inauguration as our troll-in-chief by the liberal pundit Touré. So, each was meant as a dig. The troll is the bottom feeder of the internet culture, not a hero, but Trump gladly owned the slur. When a Twitter user called him the most superior troll on the platform back in 2013, Trump replied, "A great compliment," which again is just, I guess, Bannon's Leninism in action. Did I get called out as an idiot? Then it was a compliment. Okay, sure. Trolling isn't about manning an unhinged Twitter account. It describes an ethos. The troll is a figure who skips across the web, saying whatever it takes to rile up unsuspecting targets, relishing the chaos in his wake and feasting on attention, good or bad. That's recognizable from the old days, right? No such thing as bad publicity, yada yada. For Trump, that means inciting political panic with glib news conferences, all caps tweets, and made-up terrorist attacks, shifting his beliefs to suit his whims. During the campaign, the ambiguity of this spectacle worked to his advantage, freeing his supporters from their own responsibilities. When he called for a 2,000-mile-long wall or suggested banning an entire religion from entering the country, the sheer extremity of these ideas let voters view them as goading performances instead of real plans. And with every political shrug, the web's most antisocial sensibility rose further into the heights of American public life. Now that the trolling ethos has infiltrated the actual core of government, whole systems are being forced to improvise around Trump's inscrutable center. He is a frequently insincere and unserious person, placed in the most serious of positions. Politicians on the right find themselves staking claims on Trump's throwaway accusations, pretending that massive vote fraud exists, or that angry constituents at town halls are paid protesters. Journalists wrestle with late-night tweets that carry the weight of the presidency, but also seem designed only to enrage and confuse. What does it mean for the American presidency itself to become a fake-out? Troll culture was forged in the primordial ooze of the internet in a time when online social interaction took place in rolling walls of text. In 1993, what is this? Lambda Mu. That M-O-O is in caps. Lambda Mu, not Mu, but Mu. Lambda Mu, a popular virtual community, was besieged by a user called Mr. Bungle, a character dressed as a clown. And look at this. I'm telling you what it says. A character dressed as a clown in a semen-stained costume. That's pretty trolly right there. One evening, Mr. Bungle used a programming trick to make it appear as if other users were performing violent sex acts on one another. That's some programming trick. Later, when the targets demanded an explanation, Mr. Bungle typed, "It was purely a sequence of events with no consequence on my real life, RL, existence." Okay. But boy, does that sound intellectual, doesn't it? He was just messing with people, delighting in the power to provoke a reaction from a remove. And because everyone involved could just log off, those left shaken by words on a computer screen were made to feel silly. As one commentator said during the ensuing controversy, I think that freedom would be well served by simply toughening up. Mr. Bungle was a lone wolf, but trolling could also be a communal activity. On 1990s Usenet groups, users would post in-jokes and provocations in a bid to flush out naive newcomers. And with 4chan, an anonymous anime-obsessed message board started by a teenager in 2003, trolling charged beyond its online vicinity and into the offline lives of distant strangers. In the most notorious incident, 4chan trolls latched onto a MySpace page memorializing a 7th grader who had killed himself, ridiculing the child's recent disappointments and seizing on grammatical errors in posts from mourners. One had called him an hero, which is not necessarily grammatically incorrect, by the way. Hero starting with the letter H, but okay. Let's not get into that arcana. Soon, they were placing harassing phone calls to the boy's parents and snapping prank photos at his grave. Internet trolls work by exploiting the gap between the virtual and the real. They float, weightless and anonymous, across the web and then reach out and rattle people who are pinned down by fixed ideologies, moral codes, ew, gross, and human emotions. Any attachment to principles, even really basic ones like don't torture grieving parents, gives the troll an opening. Stretching back to Mr. Bungle, trolling was always about the distance between people who care and people who don't. The people who cared always lost. Often they were counseled to detach as much as the trolls had, to withhold their outrage, to not, quote, feed the trolls, to pretend there was a real distinction between doing horrible things and meaning them. So the trolls scampered onto their next targets, amassing more followers along the way. I can tell you that internet trolls, by the way, pre-existed even all of these examples back in the old BBS days, bulletin board system days, where you just used your 300 baud modem to call up a local phone number, log on, leave messages for your friends, etc. Trolling was real, alive, and active as early as I know it in the early 80s. And I guess it probably predated that even on the more rudimentary systems. Anyway, it was during the summer of 2014 that internet trolling boiled over into mainstream crisis. It began with a seething accusatory blog post about a video game developer named Zoe Quinn, written by an ex-boyfriend. What seemed like a small personal conflict managed to explode into a culture war complete with bomb threats and harassment campaigns. First came the nihilistic trolls. Some even hoped to compel Quinn to an-hero herself, tittering 4chan code for committing suicide. But as Gamergate, as it came to be called, grew, it coalesced into a movement that looked awfully political. Interesting that at the same time that Occupy was working hard to stay apolitical in terms of electoral politics, Gamergate ended up being the one that was political. Despite their self-presentation as ciphers, trolls have always had a point of view, and Gamergate offered a platform for a whole coalition to express its distrust of media, resentment towards women, and anger at progressive critiques of racism and misogyny. They had demands, too, unlike Occupy, right? They worked to get journalists fired, pressure advertisers, and to silence feminist critics. To outsiders, Gamergate looked like a cesspool of angry, entitled young men nobody else wanted to talk to. What do you know? Objective reality. But some right-wing figures spied an opportunity. Mike Cernovich, author of a hypermasculine self-help blog called Danger and Play, joined the cause. This would be one of the pickup artists, right? I use trolling tactics, he says, to build my brand, he later told The New Yorker. So did Milo Yiannopoulos, then writing for the website Breitbart News, which helped midwife the controversy from a fringe freakout to a right-wing political perspective. I hurt people for a reason, he said recently. I like to think of myself as a virtuous troll. Donald Trump saw political promise in this world, believe it or not. And as his White House bid seemed on the brink of collapse last summer, he found a new campaign manager in the Breitbart executive chairman Stephen K. Bannon, a sincere nationalist, maybe, with trolling tendencies of his own. But I'm a Leninist, because that's intellectual. I'm not a troll, I'm a Leninist. Now Bannon sits on, and by the way, if you were to say, so I read up on Leninism, Bannon, and you're not a Leninist, you're an idiot. It has nothing to do with what Leninism, normie, I made you read Lenin. I don't really care. Okay, fine. What a win for you. Now Bannon sits on the National Security Council. That is troubling. And many Trump supporters are fusing the trolling ethos with an old culture war tropes, amusing themselves by calling liberals delicate snowflakes and delighting at being in on Trump's, quote, joke. As the right-wing columnist John Feehery put it after Trump's February 16th news conference, performance art can be so hard for normal people to understand. People like Cernovich, who jumped easily from Gamergate to the Trump train, have taken to calling their political posture anti-fragile. Nassim Nicholas Taleb's word for systems that thrive on volatility and stress. Trump, Taleb has said, is heavily vaccinated because of his checkered history. Nothing new can shame him. Nothing matters. Interesting. The troll figure feels as new as the smartphones in our hands, but his trail of destruction stretches deep into history. Toward the end of World War II, Jean-Paul Sartre looked at the anti-Semites of Europe and saw something that still sounds familiar. Never believe that anti-Semites are completely unaware of the absurdity of their replies, he wrote in a 1944 essay, Anti-Semite and Jew. They are amusing themselves, for it is their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. Anti-Semites delight in acting in bad faith, since they seek not to persuade by sound argument, but to intimidate and disconcert. It does sound familiar. Recently, we've witnessed a resurgence of this winking Nazi type. PewDiePie, remember this guy? I remember bringing him up the other day, and he came up a couple weeks ago. He came up again in the news just the other day. Have another one I don't understand. A wildly popular YouTube video game star filmed a prank in which he hired two men to hold up a sign that said, "Death to all Jews." What a prank. Pepe the Frog, an online cartoon that morphed into a 4chan meme, has been co-opted by plugged-in fascists who redraw him with swastikas for eyes. And after the white nationalist Richard Spencer, a man who voiced support for peaceful ethnic cleansing, yelled "Hail Trump" at a Washington conference and received Nazi salutes from crowd members, he claimed it was all ironic. These days, even David Duke, a sincere and straightforward white supremacist, is sharing racist memes and getting called a troll. But when Spencer showed up in Washington for the inauguration, explaining his Pepe lapel pin to the press, a masked protester ran up and collapsed all that ironic distance by punching him in the face. Which is why it's okay, by the way, to punch Nazis in the face. I'm not punching people in the face. I'm not acting violently. I'm not disrupting social order. I'm collapsing at an ironic distance. And if you don't appreciate it, perhaps you need to separate yourself from your strict moral code, normie. Trolls work through abstraction, leveraging the internet and irony to carve out a space between actions and consequences. Becoming president has blown Trump's cover. There's nothing more consequential than this. Trolls are typically outsiders and sad ones at that. They don't fit into the dominant group, so they terrorize it from the sidelines. Trenchcoat Mafia, if you don't recognize it. Part of what makes Trump's administration so alarming is that the troll sensibility now dominates. And when that happens, it's reminiscent of what Sartre described. No reason, no principle, just the pure exercise of power. I don't think they're quite there yet, but it does sound alarmingly familiar. Okay. So I thought that was a good companion piece to the one we read from Lawfare blog. I don't know whether this encourages or discourages. We have yet to find out. But if it, whatever it was, it's totally what I meant. That's my Bannon Leninist take on that. Joan McCarter, now here joining us. Good morning, Joan. How you doing?
Good morning, Kagro.
Feeling
I'm
good?
surviving.
Okay, that's good. We, at a minimum, that's good news.
after live blogging last night.
Yeah, that must have been something.
I had to open up the laptop again this morning.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's not an assignment I would have enjoyed, I don't think. I don't know if you did either.
I did not enjoy. Enjoy was not
No.
was not part of the bargain.
Well, no, I guess not. But it has to be done nonetheless. I don't even know. Do you want to avoid the topic entirely, or I mean?
Well, you and Greg did a pretty darn good.
We did. But that's only
think.
because we got the first chance.
I share with Greg waking up this morning to see the punditry and the extremely low bar they have.
Yeah. Well, it is really rather remarkable, and I think a lot of it I think is explained even by the trolling articles that we were just reading through. That it doesn't matter whether they do a good job of anything or not, because if they don't and everybody calls them on it, they say, "Well, we meant to not do a good job because we're disrupting good jobs." I guess, but in this case, it really was a low bar, and I think everybody had guessed ahead of time that as long as he reads what is written for him and doesn't fall down or die in the middle of the speech or ad lib too much, that everybody would say it was a great success. And that's what happened.
That's what happened to the White House's surprise, it looks like.
Yes.
According to Robert Costa.
Yeah.
Who tweets, some sources in the White House are frankly surprised at how pundits are warming to the speech. Mm-hmm. Say Trump has not changed. No big shift in policy coming. And we knew that. We heard him. He said that. In fact, he made policies that were worse, like his voice office.
Oh, yes.
I don't know what kind of office it is, but it's to give voice to the victims of immigrant crime.
Yes, it was one of the worst acronyms I think ever devised. It doesn't make any particular sense. What was it?
Terrible
victims?
Acronym, even worse idea.
Yes, well, right. I think maybe if we stick to the substance of the idea, we'll be even more disappointed. But I don't know. I guess it's emblematic of what they're trying to do, that they said, well, this is what we want the acronym to be. Now hammer it into work.
Yeah.
Victims of immigration crimes engagement.
Yeah.
Which I don't really, they needed an E.
They needed an E.
And crime engagement. It's an office of engaging with the victims of immigration crimes, which are not a thing. It's crimes committed by immigrants is what they're trying to get at, but
which is also not that big of a thing.
It's not only not a big of a thing, but I just checked this. I'm pretty sure the fact checkers will agree with me. Almost all of the things that are illegal no matter what your immigration status is when you do them.
Indeed.
Now there are a few things that are automatically illegal just because you're an immigrant, if you immigrate undocumented. But if you assault somebody, if you kill somebody, I'm certain you already can go to jail for those things. But if you're Mexican when you do them,
the victim and the victim's families are not going to be more traumatized by the fact that it is an immigrant. If your kid is killed, it doesn't matter who did it.
But they do have ways of somehow convincing themselves that they have been more traumatized by saying, well, that person shouldn't have been here in the first place. Well, a lot of things shouldn't happen. But, I mean, really, honestly, this is like the office of butterfly effect crime at this point. But the point is enhanced sentencing for Mexicans ought to be the name of the office instead. And I only, of course, pin it on Mexicans because that's the one they love to point out. Meanwhile, it's not typically even Mexicans who are doing the bulk of the immigration movement. Not at this point, anyway. But I don't know. The whole thing was scary.
And by the way, maybe you could think possibly about guns.
Yes.
In that formula. Maybe.
Possibly. Yeah, right. Well, that not mentioned, along with Russia, not mentioned. But I didn't expect him to make any mention of any of those things. Although I thought he might try to throw a Second Amendment applause line in there, and I'm surprised he didn't bother to do that.
No.
Huh. But I guess it didn't matter because it certainly seemed to me, I don't know that this is the case, and nobody has reported that this is the case, but certainly It may be that they realized on their own that this was the role that the Republican conference was supposed to play, but clearly, let's clap as many times as possible, as long as possible. Let's give standing ovations. Let's yell and shout and cheer.
Let's break records.
Right, break records. Yes, he's very proud of himself for that one. Once again, turning the situation into being about him.
Yep.
Even though he spent the bulk of the day prior to the speech denying that it had anything to do with him, the glorious part was certainly him. He wanted you to know.
I think that is the grossest part of the punditry's zeal for this speech. They're pointing to that moment. Even Van Jones is pointing to that moment, saying that's when he was presidential.
That was weird.
He was using the widow of the guy he got killed in a botched raid as a prop.
Although in a strange way, I was thinking early this morning, that is kind of, I mean, it's presidential in a way. It's the worst thing about the presidency, no matter who occupies it. But it is something that presidents do. They do it in different ways and to different degrees, to be sure. But I guess the use of the widow as, as prop, it does happen. But usually it happens in a lower key setting and with a decent interval having passed, or if not, if the decent interval hasn't passed, then it's at the cemetery in the handing over of the folded flag where that happens. But that's sort of an accepted use of things, and it is common for presidents
it's part
to do
of the ritual.
Yes.
Of military service.
This was a bit
and of what presidents do,
escalation.
and of presidents taking responsibility as commander-in-chief.
There we are. That part was missing,
for
right.
the lives of the men and women who are serving under him. Him so far.
Yeah, I guess that's
all of
it.
that part was missing because Trump has not taken responsibility for the death of this man.
Yeah. Did he attend the funeral? I don't know. I mean, that's not really a great measure necessarily, but that's the part of it. Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part of the job is out of the way of, there's cameras, yes, but out of the way of cheering crowds, handing that flag over. That's the part that'll tax you. But instead, he did the, raise the roof for the applause here, everybody. He got that one. And so, although he at the end says, well, the applause is really for her, you broke the record. That's the one bit of credit he's willing to give out here. But I set this whole thing up, and thank you, by the way, for noticing that it was me who looked presidential. It wasn't her, curiously enough. The applause is for you, but I'm the one that looks presidential by giving you that much applause. That's okay. That's a little weird. That was a little surprising to see how quickly that was latched onto as the most presidential moment by people you wouldn't expect.
It really was. When it was nauseating, frankly.
Yes.
And it's the thing that I woke up with still horrified at.
Yeah. That was tough. Although I think I should look this one up, but I guess Simon Malloy was pointing out that last night that it's wrong to point at this and say it's presidential, but it's very brilliant in the sense that they know that will likely work.
Yeah.
People will walk away and say they did say he was presidential for doing that, and he said some things, and he pointed at someone who was a war widow, and there was a lot of applause, and then some pundits agreed with him. So, that's ironclad in America. Yeah, that was rather disturbing, to say the very least. But we're back at it today, and he'll be back at Mar-a-Lago this weekend anyway, so I assume this will all be undone by then.
Yeah. Well, and, things are already... He didn't move any important policy needles.
No.
Like on Obamacare.
Yeah.
Because the headline at Politico today is Republicans fight over what Trump meant on Obamacare.
Yeah, that's true. We all want to know what he meant about all these things.
He capitulated to everything Paul Ryan has asked for pretty much in terms of the vague policy things he set out. Health savings accounts, insurance across state lines, block granting Medicaid.
yes.
That was all there. None of that is what pretty much a defining block of the Republican conference, at least in the House, wants.
Mm-hmm.
They've rejected it.
Oh. Whoops.
Whoops. So,
I see.
you know.
So now we have problems.
Still.
But every problem can be solved, and I alone can solve them. So that's why we're having to listen to this. The part about Obamacare was confusing, so it's interesting to see that even they don't know what he really meant. I thought the selling insurance across state lines was like, well, that's the automatic applause line. Nobody even knows what that means either, but they do say it a lot, so we'll say it too. And even some of the things that he said that were understood by Republicans to be things they wanted, but also could easily have been understood if it was a different person, but same words, to have meant things that we wanted. Like where they said, well, and we also want to give governors the flexibility to cover more of their people using Medicare. Yes, we do. That's right. I thought we agreed on something there. That's very interesting because it was a big part of the... Oh, you mean the opposite of that. Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Flexibility.
Yep. Gosh.
Flexibility, when it's used by a Republican, is code for block grant, which is code for giving a Republican governor the ability to create a whole bunch of humiliating hoops for people to jump through on the way to trying to get health care. Diminishing hoops that weed people out.
Yeah. And then the money not spent on them can then be moved to other programs like plugging their budget gaps.
Exactly.
And see, I wanted to be flexible with this. Money that was given to me to take care of you, I am going to use to take care of me. That's flexibility.
I'm going to use to take care of the hole created by this big tax cut I just gave the wealthy people.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
that's what flexibility means when you're a Republican.
Okay, so we can use that. There ought to be like a Chrome extension that helps journalists with that. Who said that? A Republican? Flexibility? Okay, here's what you need to put in.
I think the important takeaway from what he said on healthcare last night is that he has given up on his insurance for everybody. That's out the window.
Oh, all right.
It's now access.
Ah.
And access is not insurance.
No, it's not.
Remember how it used to be when it was Obama we were fighting over with healthcare? It was not insurance isn't healthcare.
Right, universal insurance.
Universal insurance does not mean universal access to healthcare.
Right.
Now it's
universal access
to insurance.
That's right. For instance, if you have seen a State Farm commercial on television, you have access to insurance.
Pretty much.
Yeah, you just dial the 1-800 number. And then whatever happens after that, I don't know, something happens, and then, boom, you're insured. I think it involves the exchange of money.
You have access to it, so if you're not, not our problem.
Right.
We gave you the 800 number.
I don't know what happens after you call, but if the right things happen, insurance will happen at the end of that. It may mean that you have to pay $1 million a month, but surely you can do that. Just go, do it.
Right, because we gave you a health savings account.
Right.
Which is the other thing that you knew had to be there, which is pointless. It's a tax break again for the wealthy. You get good tax benefits if you can afford to have a health savings account. But if you can afford to have a health savings account, you could afford to have better insurance, hopefully. And most people can't afford them.
Yeah.
Is the thing.
The health savings account, that's always been garbage.
Yeah.
I don't really even know who, there's a slice of people who benefit from them. Relatively young, affluent people who nonetheless believe they need to have insurance. They just, usually.
And it's a belt and suspenders thing for a lot of those people.
Right. I already have insurance.
Because they get that tax break. They already have insurance. They can get a tax break if they create this health savings account. Mm-hmm. So they're doing it mostly for the tax shelter. And there's money there if they break their arm or have an appendicitis attack or something. But they already have insurance that'll cover most of that.
Right. And then, when you get charged a deductible for that, you pay it out of the health insurance,
Right.
the health savings account. Okay, so that it's not. Well, look, you save money out of pocket. No, that was my pocket. I took it out of.
Yeah.
But I gave you the ability to create that pocket. I said, now there you go. Instead of for out of pocket expenses, we're giving you access to your pocket that you can pay out of for out of pocket expenses. Isn't that great? I owned the pocket. I know, but I told you could use it. Thank you.
And we call it health. So there.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's health coverage because it says it right in the name. By the way, Mark Sumner has tweeted that the actual results that Donald Trump cares about are out. The TV ratings are out.
There we go.
Wow, he says the ratings are in, and Donald Trump got swamped by comparison to the ratings machine Barack Obama. TV ratings from Hollywood Reporter say his Congress address falls from comparable Obama speech. So he's up from recent State of the Union addresses, but still off a steep 17% from non-State of the Union type addresses, as was the case in 2009. So since everybody was on the ball pointing out that this wasn't the State of the Union address, we can only compare it to the last such non-State of the Union address in which he got killed by 17 points. So there you go. But he'll just instead say the last State of the Union is what I'm comparing it to, and it's up against that by 1,000%.
And by the way, it was watched. I can't remember what I saw. The tweet this morning didn't follow it. Many more Republicans watched than Democrats. Looking for that tweet now.
Oh, likely the case. I don't doubt it. I note, I guess for the record, I usually don't watch those addresses, and I did watch this one, and I watched it to see whether he would wreck anything or say something terrible. There was no chance there was going to be any substantive policy outlined, and that's the reason I don't watch them normally, is that I think they will outline substantial policy, and I just will wait to see what it is the next day.
That's generally what one likes to do, but
yeah, this one I wanted to see in case, he said anything terrible or mispronounced something. I wanted to see if he got
Gina. We did get Gina.
Yes, we got that one. He did. Somebody corrected him on how to say sequester. That was good. I'm glad of that one. That one was so funny, just from the confidence with which he paused and wound up at sequester. Okay? Wow. All right. So he got the word sequester, although I don't think he said sequestration, which would have been better, but that's too long for him. But
and, watching Paul Ryan there. Paul Ryan, I just got the visual of Paul Ryan and lost train of thought. Enthusiastically applauding his getting rid of the sequester on defense when Paul Ryan voted for it.
Yeah. Oh, just the background of that story, just amazing when you think about it and you bring it all back to mind. Remember, it was never going to happen because nobody wanted it, and everybody would, of course, be working like dogs, as Trump might have said, to avoid it, and then nobody could manage to avoid it, and then
it was the nuclear option of budgeting. Right. It was the thing that the worst case scenario that we create to make us do our jobs with a budget.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course it would all be handled by the super committee, which would totally work because it would be equally divided between the two parties, and
it would be super.
Yeah. It's super because it's obviously fair, because equal numbers equals fair, except it also equals stalemate and failure. But, oh well. The point is, we did it. We called it super. It had the same number of people from each party on it. And now that thing that nobody wanted and everybody was sure we would avoid will happen. But we were definitely going to avoid it. And remember why. The Republicans were definitely going to bend somewhere, because the consequence of sequester, as he would have it, was enormous cuts to the defense budget. And nobody could do that and survive. Then they did it and they survived and came back to say, the part we don't like, we'd like to get rid of, except It turned out not to be all that easy to undo, but now...
but they have the overseas contingency fund that they can keep stealing from
so
to boost defense spending. So they figured out a way to make it work.
Yes, but now they need even more than that fund has got available to them, so they have to cut elsewhere. Or they do the scene from the movie Dave, where they shave off bits and pieces of other parts of the government and say, we can just put it right here in defense. We can just make that happen. Well, we'll see. The guys who are doing all the applauding and the non-applauding are the ones who are going to have to work that out in the next couple of weeks, and that'll be one of the few legislative vehicles that moves in the next couple of weeks.
Maybe.
You think more? Or maybe it won't move?
I think maybe it won't move.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the proposal that Trump put out on Monday is already dead on arrival. Republicans declared it so.
That's the favorite game. I mean, longtime watchers of the budget process and longtime listeners of the show. No, that you can always bet somebody's going to say the president's budget is dead on arrival.
Well, but that was a given when it was a Republican Congress and a Democratic president.
Yes. Although
now it's Republicans saying, no, we will not accept this. John McCain, because it's not enough defense spending, despite it's the biggest defense spending increase. Mm-hmm. So Reagan's weren't this big.
Wow. A record.
but a record. A record-setting increase. Not enough for John McCain. But Lindsey Graham is saying, no way you can cut the State Department as much as he wants to cut the State Department. Of course, they're not talking about all of the other cuts that he's coming up with to get his defense spending increase, since he's not touching Social Security and Medicare yet, as we've heard from Munchkin and from the OMB guy, Mulvaney.
Okay.
Since he's not cutting those things, it's going to come from other safety net programs.
Okay.
But again, just remember, it's a yet on not cutting Social Security and Medicare.
That's true. We have to wait a little while until he proposes that. Well, the rules are that you can't do that in reconciliation, and they definitely want to use their reconciliation bill to some effect. What? I don't know. By the way, I think we're still waiting for those reconciliation instructions to be turned into legislative language.
Yeah. Because they're still fighting over how they're going to do repeal. Because they're fighting over whether they're going to do replace.
Yes. All right. Well, I don't know when we're going to get that.
We're back to how you can get a bill that passes in the House and still gets 50 votes in the Senate.
Yeah.
Because, on the House side, you've got to have the Planned Parenthood defunding in there because you have to, because it's the House maniacs.
They're insisting on that.
And you've got Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins saying, no, on the Senate side.
Yeah.
And you've got
that
a good half dozen, maybe even up to 10 Republican senators who are saying, we can't do this without a replace. We're not going to do this without a replace.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we hope they stick to that.
Last night's speech did not do anything to move that ball forward.
Oh, well.
We're still stuck, not figuring out how to do repeal. And frankly, I think that the balloon Trump floated, and I don't know whether he really thought he was floating a trial balloon or what he was doing, when he said we could just let this thing implode on its own. That's becoming a more viable option in my mind. That
they would?
They don't do anything. They've promised repeal, and they feel like they have to repeal, but they can keep fighting over this and not actually end up doing it. And Tom Price at HHS can do enough through and Trump through executive orders to undermine the law and to have it just fall apart.
I guess that's possible. That will take some...
It will take time. it will not be good for them in 2018 because they would piss off both the people who are expecting them to repeal and the people who are losing their health insurance because they've muddled this. But Trump somehow seems to have the idea that he could let that happen and blame it on Obama and blame it on the law and on Democrats who refuse to help, even though it's Republicans who are unable to figure out which way is up.
Well, I guess that, I mean, maybe just from pure paralysis that ends up being the way they go. It wasn't so much, you're right, a trial balloon as, it might not even have been a concession to reality. It might just have been like, I don't know what to say here. Blah, blah. It might have been an ad-lib that he just says, I don't know.
You never know what
people might, it might collapse of its own weight.
It could happen that way, though.
Yeah, I guess so. It wouldn't really be its own weight. It would be, maybe we can collapse it.
Oh, yeah, it would be through malfeasance on the part of the government that it collapsed.
And then the people who were mad about it collapsing and the people who are mad about it not being repealed, I guess he could just turn to them and say, this is the chaos I wanted. This is, I told you, he's a Leninist over here. By the way, do you have any...
Well, no, he would say, it's Obama's fault.
Oh, he could. Yeah, and I guess they don't buy that.
Everything's Obama's fault.
Yes, right. Like the raid that
people
Obama
showing up
declined
at town
to
meetings. The raid not succeeding.
Yes, that was rather amazing, right? The reason it was there on the table for you to do is because Obama said, I'm not going to do it. But it's certainly his fault. He should have
putting
tried
it on the table. He should have known better than to put it on the table.
Or to leave it there. I guess it's like leaving a loaded gun out for a toddler, right? You just, I should have thought. This guy's not going to know what to do with this thing. Hide this. It's not up to him, but... well, that was... So it may just be... I thought that's sort of a leftover applause line, almost like the buying insurance across state lines, is the idea that it would just collapse on its own. But it doesn't mesh with man of action, come in, day one, give you 30 days, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, the other. We're just going to sit here and wait for a disaster to strike.
It could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could. If
likely?
If sequester could.
It's just they can't do anything. I don't know how Republicans are going to overcome the deep, deep, deep divisions that they have over this to get enough votes to do anything. That's
the ultimate problem. They have to put together the right number of votes, and they might not be able to do that. So let's sit there.
They can do that when there's a hard and fast deadline coming up. They've been able to cobble together continuing resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of them really don't want to shut down government. So that's a concrete, right before them thing, deadline. This is happening. This is a little wobblier.
Yeah.
They're not coming up against any hard and fast wall at which a disaster occurs to act on this.
I guess not. Where are we with the funding issues? When's the next deadline for a shutdown? How long are we? Oh, I don't even remember.
I can't remember if it was. It's April, isn't it?
Something that rings a bell.
Isn't it the end of April?
That probably. Oh, that sounds about right. So I mean, that's an eternity for normal times.
Yeah.
But even in normal times, they will wait until eternity's almost over and then start.
As of today, it's March.
Yeah. Right. So next month you can say that. So I assume they cobble something together, but it should be taken as a sign of great instability, and probably will be by financial markets when the time comes to be cobbling together a continuing resolution in April, when you're supposed to be passing a forward-looking budget and beginning on the appropriations process for next year. I mean, it's clear
which is what they gave us an absolute promise of in January of last year.
Yeah, if we can just
remember?
move it forward.
Remember we were going to have a budget for the first time?
Yes, right.
We're going to do all of the
order.
appropriations bills, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember that. Now that
You
rings
know,
a
we
bell.
could be operating on Obama-era continuing resolutions for 4 years.
I guess so. Yeah, just pared down. I suppose they might even be satisfied with the idea of saying, well, we're taking a across the board slice off of it every time, which is of course equivalent to sequester, which we hate. But I guess then they say non-defense spending. So, this I don't know. We'll have to see what goes on, and I don't see any opportunity for them getting that work done.
No.
And they're way behind as it is, and for good reason, on their nominations. I saw that Wilbur Ross made it to the show, and I saw that Huffington Post managed to discover that he was wearing $600 slippers. I don't know who wears slippers.
Oh, Lord.
$600 slippers emblazoned with the Department of Commerce seal on them. I don't really know what I don't know what kind of person does that, but I guess a billionaire does it. That was very odd. People were upset that that's not hard news while you're covering it, but I think that there's something to that. I'm glad they caught that. He had just been confirmed the day before. I guess he FedExed those slippers.
Fast. Oh, Lord.
Yeah. Well, that was, that's kind of weird. I've never seen it. That's another not normal. Not normal / unimportant, but not normal.
I think there's more than 500 appointees that haven't gotten nominations. Yeah.
Right. And
514 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, they're way behind on it, and I assume that they're just going to say, there you go, we're disrupting by not having a government. Yeah. And I guess when the government shutdown comes,
I think that's a plan.
Maybe. That's it. Maybe he'll count that as part of the millions of dollars. I'm not paying anybody for these jobs. I've saved millions of dollars. All right. Well, we'll have to take it a week at a time because, this week in particular, because we're out of time.
We're out of time.
But thank you for coming by and updating us on this. And I hope you get a little bit of a break after doing the hard work of live blogging last night's mess. But I have a feeling they're going to press you back to work pretty quick.
They are, indeed.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye out for the next dispatch. Thanks very much, Joan, for coming by.
Talk to you next week.
Okay, and thanks very much again, and we'll have some more substantive material perhaps next week. Today was all about analyzing the analysis of the style instead. What can you do? That's the most normal thing about this presidency, I guess. All right, take care, Joan. We'll talk to you again next week. In the meantime, coming up on the after show for today. Hang on a second. Just got to get myself to the right screen to let you know what Justice and Wink have in store for you. Trump was so busy attacking imaginary immigrants for imaginary crimes in his address to Congress, he barely acknowledged that the real hate crimes committed in his name, once again going unmentioned. We all know about all of the anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim crimes, and anti-immigrants and anti-Indian crimes going on around the country. What else? Let's see. In the same address, Trump drew a fake conclusion from a study that actually finds immigration is good for the economy, and in what would have been the first time Tibetan women's soccer would have been represented on American soil, the team is denied entry into the U.S. for not having a strong reason to play in the Dallas Cup this spring.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I wonder what kind of reason you need to go and play in a soccer tournament if you are a soccer team. Well, it's just as well. Americans really ought to have the first crack at playing soccer for Tibet. If you ask me, those jobs belong here. Anyway, stay tuned for their view of things along with Angela Marks on today's last half on the After Show with Wink and Justice. Next.